We're not a bad deal. I take that deal.
Are we ready to go yet? Looks like it. We good? I guess so. Yeah. We'll go ahead and get started now that we've got our technical difficulties worked out. And this is our January 13th, 2025 work session, the first one of the new year. So I am going to turn it over to our city manager to introduce the items that are on our agenda.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members, good morning. Happy New Year. Real quick, I'll go ahead and have Charles come on up if he gets to start us out. But essentially, we have two topics to cover with you this morning. Both the special investment districts dealing with Invest DSM, and we've got Amber here as well for any questions that may come out of this. And then secondly, we've got our first update with the Housing Strategy Committee that's meeting and see where that's going. So that really, I'm just going to turn it over to Charles.
So as I said, I've got, Mayor, 24 slides to work through, divided into two chunks. One on the Invest DSM expansion update in terms of their geographic work, planning work being done there. And then secondarily, or afterwards, the update on the progress on the housing strategy work. Before I get started, I should just take a second and say, we've been at this on the strategy side really since the June-July timeframe, and it's preceded by an extensive amount of familiarity with the Des Moines and regional housing markets. So we were able to, I think, jump right in and get a lot of work done the last 6 months. And in the course of that, we have been supported by colleagues on staff that have just been exceptional. I do want to take a second and just say Cody and Mike's staff have been super. Cody and Mike in particular, given the frequency and volume of the work, the technical expertise involved, Carrie, just so many folks have worked so hard and at such a high level with us. So I do want to mention that. Let's see if I can figure out how to move through some of these fairly quickly. So let's just jump right in. I assume you've got slide decks you can see right there in front of you. So planning work has been underway for some time to enable Invest DSM to think in a wider geographic palette, and that work is now moving into Union Park, north of Grand Woodland Heights. These will grow the Invest DSM footprint for a period of time from 4 to 6 concentrated geographic areas. As they go forward, as expansion is something that any organization, municipal, nonprofit, or otherwise, is contemplating. The metrics are notable. I would draw your attention to the far right middle bar. The leverage ratio there, 4.37, is an astonishing metric. That is a metric exclusive of multipliers in the economy. So that means a buck in is generating 4.37 out. It's quite extraordinary. So for the $14 million that Invest DSM has pushed, that's been matched by 62.5, resulting in almost $80 million of upgrades out there. So that has a direct impact on tax base marketability and the long-term durability of the city. So it's really extraordinary work. The second metric I would draw your attention to is still on that gold side on the right, middle left, 1334. In the course of just less than a half dozen years, and through COVID, you're looking at 1,300 projects, right? More than 1,300 projects, small and large, to be sure. But each of those projects has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Just the sheer effort it takes and the expertise it takes to oversee project management on 1,300, starts, middles, ends, wrap it up and produce that type of 4.4 to 1 leverage ratio. You can't find a better way to spend public money. So when I look in the rearview mirror at 30 years of work in community development, I'm hard pressed to recall where I've seen leverage ratios that good. So that's all, I think, an important setup for the planning process and grounding InvestDSM's considerate and considerable reach now in 50% growth into an additional 2 improvement districts. So planning for that and really has been a 9-month process. It kicked off 6 months ago. The plans are in their near to final state. Our firm is working closely with InvestDSM on those. They look sharp. They're ready to go, and they will be rolling out in the next 8 weeks in one degree or another of ever higher fidelity drafts. So you can expect to see those soon. Each of these plans are guided by significant resident input, steering committee guidance, a lot of collaborative work, both with staff and board at InvestDSM, as well as resident leadership in these 2 neighborhoods. The engagement really has taken a number of forms. At our recommendation, InvestDSM has really, or at our initial recommendation, but really just at greater and greater arm's length, illustrating more and more expertise, reach, and self-sufficiency on InvestDSM's part. The guidance of kitchen table conversations on important issues in North Grand, Woodland, Union Park, and that's been supplemented by community surveys and open houses. In fact, we have an open house coming up, I believe, February 10, 11, 12, which I should hit on the subsequent slides. In the course of outreach, you would not be surprised to see what resident leaders in these neighborhoods have said about what's working. I believe you've got hard copies as well as the slides, but there's just so much to recommend, as the details show here for both these neighborhoods. They've got very bright futures, and so much of the trick right now is to amplify those strengths, right, to the best extent possible, which is really both the art and science. It's the craftsmanship of what InvestDSM has been doing. It's offset as well by not a small number of significant challenges that both neighborhoods face, from a degree of disinvestment, a degree of neglect, that it is over time taken a bit more root than you'd want to see. So you balance those two out in the curation of the work. This slide's actually a pretty critical slide. So one of the key pieces here is just looking closely at the market, closely at the footprint of structures. One of the things that's just so noticeable is the extent to which both neighborhoods are dominated by one-bathroom homes. It's a theme I want to return to when I come back to the housing strategy piece, but smaller, older, and configuration-challenged properties have an upside and a downside. They are, as you would expect, the upside is you are suppressing, prices and values. The downside is, so the upside of that is it's a much more affordable market. The downside of that is you're suppressing prices and values, and it has its own downsides. So, but you can see here, the 2-1 configurations really take a hit on the average sale price, right? So that, again, there's an upside and a downside. But the key piece here is greater than 75% of the stocks in these neighborhoods, right, are one-bathroom homes, right? So that's a lot of one-bathroom homes, right? And so they're a dominant feature of the market, asking, in the course of whatever ultimate intervention strategy InvestDSM staff and board decide to take, how do we think about that? What should our intervention look like? So in the coming months and years, I think you can expect InvestDSM to be wrestling with that as a challenge. Josh? Yeah, sure. Yeah.
When you talk one bathroom, are you talking one full? These aren't like 1.5 bath.
Correct.
It's just like one bath period.
Yeah.
Not
Right, Josh. Excuse me. I got a text from Mike Ludwig at 5 a.m., so I got to wake up. I don't know anybody else who does that. Let's see. So as we, look forward, next steps for the SID process. Morning, Councilman Coleman. I didn't see you walk in. Not at all. It's been a long time. Good to see you too. We'll be back about a month from now. There'll be public open houses. Draft plans will be on the boards. That'll be an exciting presentation of the work ahead for Invest DSM in these two neighborhoods. And I would just draw attention to that upcoming schedule. There's a lot of work to do the next 4 weeks. And I'll pivot now to housing strategy work, unless you want to pause and have any questions for me. At a general altitude, I'm joined by Amber Lynch at Invest DSM for technical questions or questions, above my pay grade.
So I've not really a question, but a comment,
Yeah.
statement. So first off, I'm a big cheerleader, and I appreciate everything you've done for this. Unfortunately, the folks that I represent get zero benefit from this program
Okay.
through redistricting. And I've had discussions with Amber. I've had discussions with my colleagues here.
When you say redistrict, you mean boundaries have been changed?
Different, my ward. I have zero commitment
Invest DSM.
from Invest DSM in my neighborhood, other than the block challenge grant.
Okay.
So, when we started, I guess we did try to divide it up into 4 different wards.
Right.
And so now, with me losing the Columbus Park area through the redistricting, I have 0. And you're taking on 2 new ones, and Amber and I have had this discussion. I think that we should have looked at including something, because continuing to put dollars in and me not being able to benefit, not just me, but the benefits for my 50,000 people that I represent is not fair. And I'm here to say it publicly. I'm here to say it. I've had discussions with our mayor. I think that needs to be changed, or else you're going to lose my support on this program. It needs, what you're saying to the folks in the southeast side and the east side is, your homes aren't good enough to be in this program right now. We can't create enough taxable value, so we're not going to help you right now. We're going to continue to let it distress. So that right there worries me. And so we need to take a harder look at it, and publicly I'm going to say that. And I hope through the at-large and the mayor and the other board members on Invest DSM that we do look at that.
I think it's a great point, Councilman. Here's what I don't know this, so I'm a little out of turn, but I would expect, right? An organization going from 4 to 6, an organization I'm familiar with, going from 4 to 6, is likely to pull the drawbridge up at some point on one of the current 4, right? So it won't.
I understand. I know there was a possibility, and we talked about it.
But I'm suggesting that what would happen is, instead of 4 to 6, it's 4 to 6 temporarily, and then it's going to be like 3 and 2, so it's 5, which would crack open, I think, a very reasonable expectation for the next one to have a greater geographic consideration.
Well, I'm hoping before the next budget cycle, that's included, or you're going to lose my support.
Understood.
I'm just publicly going to say that this isn't, this is something that needs to be shared throughout the city and worked on throughout the city. Not just we're going to pick and choose and, Ward 3 gets the majority of it, Ward 1's getting the majority of it, but Ward 4 gets 0.
I think it's an excellent point, and if I would go back a couple of slides to this one here. You can't find a better leverage ratio anywhere than 4.37 before multipliers. And therefore, now the right policy question, I'm jumping ahead to housing strategy, is how do you scale this? How do you not have tiny little pockets here? Actually, how do you scale?
I agree with this program 100%. The folks that I represent got to be included in it.
Without question.
And there's just no way around it, and I don't understand how the 2 new districts didn't include one of my districts.
Understood.
That we've talked about. it's unacceptable. It should have never been that way, and I'll leave it at that, and we can continue. But I'm hoping that we can work on that.
I think we've already talked about what areas would be appropriate and which would be easy to scale up.
We've talked about it.
Right. And I think some of it was the merging out of one neighborhood, which is the North Grand with the Drake and everything. So it is on the conversation. It's a condition of the housing and where they're at. And you do have a lot of newer housing. I'm not saying all, but there's some great areas in your area that would
Yeah,
be.
so they're either new and great areas, or they're distressed, and we're just going to leave them alone and let them continue to be distressed. Because as I look at the map, and I have a copy of the map, we need to get into some of Ward 4. We need to make some changes, because a lot of those places have single bathrooms too that could be
I think
retrofitted
we have
into
a
something
plethora
different.
of single bathrooms throughout the whole city, so you'll find that out in the housing study.
Well said.
Okay.
Anyone else on Invest DSM? Councilman?
I don't need this information today, but maybe Amber or somebody on our team. Could we get this same grid that I think is the single bathroom assessment for what 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms, 1.5, 2 bedrooms? See what the lift is.
We have that citywide, and it's been extensively analyzed, and we'll get that to you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You can have raw data if you like to go through it yourself. We can also give you sort of extrapolation. So I'll work with Mike, Cody, and Scott to stay in contact, and whatever you want, we'll just get it to you in whatever form works for you. Absolutely. Mayor, should I keep going, or you want to stay on this
Does anybody
subject?
else have any other? I think again, the numbers speak for itself for the Invest DSM markets that we've been in. And the other strong part that we can't put on money is the bringing people together, the neighborhoods, and how we've brought people to create even, I think, stronger neighborhoods just by people staying in the neighborhoods. So I just want to bring that. That's not a monetary thing, but that is an aspect of what's happened. So I would go forward with this.
So as we pivot to strategy, first citywide housing strategy, as I said earlier, we are working with an astonishingly talented, committed staff. Any questions we've had, for instance, on fine-grained details of zoning and land use, tax policy, you name it. Our questions are not unanswered, but for the 30 minutes that it takes to reply to us. So it's been great for months. As you'd expect, it's complicated. Okay, this is not. It really is not a one-dimensional issue, right? So what I've endeavored to do here is take what is got multi-dimensions and try to organize it down to the fewest moving parts for the sake of accessing what is a pretty tricky subject. So I'll start here on the role of policy and strategy, just left to right, words aside, okay? Policy is inert. It's sort of, I don't mean this literally, and I don't mean to be glib, but it's kind of pointless, right? It doesn't become alive until you pay for it, and it doesn't become alive until you regulate it. In the absence of money and in the absence of regulatory tools, it's inert, right? Probably after 35 years in the planning field, the question, I, like most planners, are asked most frequently is, can you please write us a plan that doesn't sit on the shelf? And it doesn't matter what state we're in, what city we're in, everybody asks us for that. When you do the forensics on why is it that that's the first question you're asking us, it's always because they're really good at making policy statements. They're really good at sort of, the signaling. They're really good at saying things, but in actually writing checks, right, it gets harder. And then in enacting the regulatory framework, it gets twice as hard. And then keeping your foot on the gas pedal, it gets exponentially harder, right? And so then they think that, well, gosh, the plan never got implemented. And it's not because the plan actually lacked anything. So our predecessors in planning work in any city are superb planners. It's the right answer to the question, what about a plan that doesn't sit on the shelf, is guys need to look in the mirror. It's always the case in any city we work in, right? What's your commitment to paying for it, which is always an issue of trade-offs, right? And then what's your commitment to the regulatory framework, right? Which has to do with fidelity to the principles, right? So those are Those are real things that I think as you contemplate, what do we do with our housing ambitions? You know, what is the taproot of our ambitions, and what is our fidelity to it, right? Why? Answering the why question is real work. So this is probably the best slide of the deck, which is to say, this is after really looking at data for months and months and months. This is the one that I think is the storyteller. I would draw your attention to the far left, okay? So let me start off and say that we think your market is generally healthy. It's not healthy, it's generally healthy, which is to say it's with qualifiers. There's an asterisk, there's a footnote, okay? In some respects, and what I told the steering committee for this project, what I told staff early on, was that we kind of think the Des Moines market is something of a Goldilocks market. There's a lot to like. It's kind of just right. The porridge is neither too hot nor too cold, right? But when the porridge is neither too hot nor too cold, you have some tricky issues, right? So it's got vulnerability. Now go to the far right of the slide. We think there are two vulnerabilities. These are vulnerabilities, by the way, we pointed out in the neighborhood work several years ago. So it should be no surprise, a city of this size, in a county of this size, and a market this complex, that you're not going to see, it's like turning the Queen Mary. So, in 4, 5, or 6 years, you don't see huge differences. Therefore, it's no surprise we're not seeing largely what we saw several years ago. The market's much stronger, by the way, than it was several years ago, but it's still basically the same market. And there are two vulnerabilities. One is you've got concentrated financially vulnerable households. All right, so your financially vulnerable households tend to be geographically concentrated, no surprise to any of you. And likewise, the homes they're finding, right, are low tax value properties. Those are concentrated. So these two things go hand in hand, right? And so they create kind of a warm but not hot porridge, right? What they do is they give you a income to value ratio, right, of about 2.08 when you really want to be in the high 2s, low 3s, right? They give you even a price. Now it's different, the price to income ratios is a healthy 2.88, right? Right, that's actually pretty good, pretty darn good, right? That doesn't mean it doesn't come with challenges to migrate from renter to owner, right? But your value to your income to value ratio is 2.08. And so you want that a little bit higher, right? So what you end up with here is affordable value to income ratios, accessible price to income ratios. The good news is that your values since 2013 are holding pretty steady, and sometimes, depending on the location, outpacing, and really depending on the location, far outpacing inflation, so they turn out to be a good investment. That's not the case throughout the entire city, but overall, it's a good market with this challenge, okay, that you've got concentrations of structures that have a direct link to the fiscal stability of the city, and a concentration of financially struggling households, which has its own challenges that you as a city would have to face from time to time, right? So in the center right there is what we would draw your attention to, a large number and a high percentage of smaller, neglected stocks, okay? So no surprise. Lauren, can you help me? I don't know what happened. It was bound to happen. Whoops. Oh, thank you. So here now, sort of, I would draw your attention to what you've got. 96,000. We could focus on the number, but you might as well just call it 100,000. So you have 100,000 housing units. Okay. Your new construction production rate, okay, is such that we look back the last 20 years and we just hold steady for the next 20 years. We hold all else constant. You'll be in column A. Okay. Which means that in 2045, the city you will have stocks, right, comprise 95%, 96% actually of the stocks you will have 20 years from now exist today. Right? They're not going anywhere. Most client cities we have are easily seduced by the confection of new construction. Everybody talks about new construction, right? There's good reason, right? It's new, it's shiny, right? It's exciting, okay? But at the end of the day, your current production rate, the last 20 years, if it continued straight line, would still leave you 20 years from now, right, with essentially 95%, 96% of what you have then, you have now, okay? All right? Now, that's not good or bad, it just is, all right? If we look at the Woods and Pool data, which we rely on for population projections and to really sort of figure out what's going to happen in Dallas County, Warren County, Polk County, the region, the state, the Midwest, you know, and whatnot, there's every reason to think you might be in column C, right? You could be in column C. But even there, it's still 86%, right? It's not 50-50. It's not 40-60, right? It's 86%, which 86% is basically 9/10, okay? And so it doesn't matter whether you produce 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, or 20,000, right? You still are talking about 8, 9, or 9.5/10 20 years from now, right? Already on the ground today, right? And to the extent that that 96,000 units is in great shape, okay shape, or in trouble shape, now you've got, I think, what we think is the center of the housing conversation you want to be thinking about from a policy point of view, which traces now to two pieces. One is what we call a market gap, right? I credit to Matt in the back row, who years ago said, you know, the appraisal gap, the market gap, talk about it as a market gap. It's a better way to think about it. It was great advice so many years ago. And so on the market gap piece, here, what we would draw your attention to is, actually, let me go back a slide. Just hang on one second. So now let's take let's just, if I could get you to come back with me to this slide. Of the 96, 48% of that are older, smaller, neglected. 45,000. 50%, one half. All right, one of every two homes in the city are older, smaller, neglected. Okay, hence hard to. I'm sorry.
All three of those or one of them?
There are enough. There are enough small, enough older, and enough neglected for me to confidently say all three. Okay, so some are small. Some are. There are some that are small and not quite neglected as much as others. There are some that are neglected and a little bit larger. There are some that are neglected and larger and have 1.5s. You know, some have 4-1 configurations, 4-2, 3-2. But in general, I can confidently say, and you can confidently hear, that you have 45,000 older, smaller, neglected, right? And when you have 45,000 or one of two older, smaller, neglected, you have limited demand. And when you have limited demand, you have suppression of prices. The good news is when you have suppression of prices, right, they're affordable. The bad news is that suppression of prices traces right to the tax base, okay? So now, you've got two pieces of demographic information on the next two slides that are not unrelated to this. On the far left, you are about 13,000 households short, okay, of what would be expected in a proportionally balanced region of households earning $100,000 or more. Before, now I'm not suggesting you would, but before you think $100,000 is a massive amount of income, and it's not a small amount of income, starting salary at TSA is $46,000 for one worker. That means two TSA workers, right, are at $90,000. Right? You are 13,000 households short of two TSA worker households. We're not having the conversation in 1983 where $100,000 is a Netscape, engineer, right? It's 2025. $100,000, right, is a middle income salary, right? And you are 13,000 households short of those households. That means their purchasing power isn't in the city, and consequently, your property values are 60% of the counties after we've excluded for the city and teased out all the numbers. Okay? And what accounts for that? It's the albatross. It's 45,000 smaller, older, neglected homes. Okay? So now we go to the affordability piece, which so they works on both sides. There's no just this. It's all two-sided. They all go together, right? The affordability piece, the market piece, the market piece, the affordability piece, right? And I want to assure you this is really presented in an agnostic way. They're neither good nor bad. It just is. Okay? They're just numbers. All right, so on the flip side, you've got about 10,000, it's actually 9,800, I believe is the number, but about 10,000 more households with incomes under $50,000. Right? And that translates into about 14,000 households, particularly renter households, right? Those that have those renter households with incomes under $50,000, their cost burden. Now, that number would be far worse if you didn't have 45,000 older, smaller, neglected homes, because those older, smaller, neglected homes are more affordable, right? Setting aside quality, just the structure fetches only but so much price, right? What happens is when that structure, when you aim to upgrade that structure, now we have to amortize the debt to finance the upgrade. And then it renders it the math is completely different, okay? Right? So let's now sort of talk about that math. Yes, Mr. Of course.
On the left,
Yes, sir.
it says 10,000 more than would be expected in a proportionally.
Yes, sir.
Is there such a thing, or is that theoretical? I mean,
You mean, does such a place exist in the world?
yeah.
That's a great
in
question.
The Midwest, like, are we comparing ourselves to a benchmark, or?
Oh, no, I'm simply talking here, that's only referring to Des Moines in the context of Polk, not even the metro, okay? That's just Polk, okay? So it would actually be a far different, Dallas isn't that big, but the numbers would be more challenged if we expanded the geography to look at proportionality vis-a-vis Polk, Dallas. But this is just Des Moines vis-a-vis Polk, Dallas.
So, well, there's cities that are like this.
I thought that's what you're. Other places in the United States.
Indianapolis.
Are there benchmarks we should take a look at?
It's a great question. I have not looked at the extent to which your imbalances, for want of a better word, are more than or less than others. It would take us an hour to get you an answer. And so how about in responding to your other earlier questions, we'll get you answers to that question as well. It's a great question.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic question.
Like, I'd be very proud to be the first city that, like, I think that it's a good thing to look at. I trying to.
Now
Probably
that
depends
you've
on
raised the
method.
question, I wouldn't be surprised that you're closer than the overwhelming majority of other places we're going to look at. Another parity, you are within striking distance in the next 25 years of parity, and I'm hard pressed to think of other jurisdictions that could claim that progress in 20 years. That would be, that would be quite an accomplishment, quite a notable accomplishment were you to be able to do that. That's significant.
If I could add that a lot of this depends on what state rules are for jurisdictions and annexation. And so if you were to think of like in Omaha, the Nebraska law allows them to expand all the way to their county borders. And so the numbers for Omaha, which include nearly the entire county, would mirror what their county average is. And so that's the way you have to think about this is the disparity is jurisdiction of Des Moines versus all of Polk County.
That is correct.
Okay, so looking outside of Iowa, you have to take into consideration what opportunities for multiple jurisdictions in the same market.
Kind of the same setup we have, whereas like in Indianapolis is a metro government.
That's correct. So if you're in Lexington, if you're in Nashville, those are regional cogs, the way they work. And so, so some combination of annexation, de-annexation can always do that. If we just drew the boundary differently and said, okay, instead of, trying to look at Des Moines vis-a-vis the context it sits inside in the county and simply drew it around the county, you're at proportional, parity, right away. We just chose to draw it in the case because, in point of fact, you are in a kind of a cutthroat competition with your suburbs, and so we would have been remiss to articulate where you are as a housing market to not recognize the competitive reality that you have with the surrounding suburbs.
I have a question, and this may be a bigger philosophical one in the way we approach this. We're setting this up as kind of a jurisdictional issue. Des Moines versus the suburbs, and who has what portion of high-income households or affordable households, and is that balanced in the metro? But housing is really a societal problem, not a jurisdictional. There's a jurisdictional element that comes down to tax base, but housing as a whole is a societal issue, and if society doesn't solve it holistically, the problems are going to exist, and they're going to potentially gravitate somewhere.
That's true, but you have a free rider dilemma here, which is to say, it's a classic economic problem where the county is being served disproportionately by the city, extending a disproportionate amount of its hand to the detriment disproportionately of the city's tax base to resolve a regional balance issue. So you are on the wrong end of a free rider dilemma.
Right. Wrong end of society not solving it.
Society's not paying for it equally. You're paying for it more than equally.
I think it's bigger than this.
Well, we got to be
There's
concerned about, we're kind of concerned about this. It is an issue, but this is what we're trying to analyze. How do we support all the things that everybody wants when our tax base, as we all know, is already off with 40%, you can't. And then if we've got undervalued or not kept up, I think it's more, or empty lots or things that are so depressed, then that's where I think we have opportunity.
So where this takes us on the market side is when we look at what's the impact of 45,000 smaller, neglected, older structures. I think different analysts might come to a different number, but we come to about $1 billion number. Okay, it's about $1 billion in aggregate in what you might call. Hopefully, your city finance director won't correct me here, but what we might call, your ad valorem deficit is $1 billion. Okay, I got $1 billion that you should have that you don't have, right? And so if you take that $1 billion and you distribute it across 72,000 households, you begin to see where that negative equity shows up in different places, right? Well, that sounds like bad news. It's actually not bad news because curing that gets you a leverage ratio. So if we go back to that Invest DSM place, right? It's going to likely turn out that a significant portion, right, at least two-thirds of that $1 billion, the private sector wants to participate in, will pay for it. Right? So it is a $1 billion issue, right? But it is not a $1 billion issue borne solely on the shoulders of the public sector, right? So then it becomes now if you're thinking housing strategy, it's like, okay, how do we drive $1 billion, right, with the fewest public dollars possible? How do we live in that but-for world, right? How do we get past the but-for test? How do we spend, X dollars to drive, free action? Okay, so if we take the same sort of thinking right now to the affordability issue, that's about a $3 billion, right? This is not chump change now, okay? This is actually the not good news. Let me go back a slide. On this previous piece, this $1 billion issue, actually, it's not like you're doing no work now, right? Your TIF work, your abatement work, the net of policies, the grounding that Invest DSM gives you, right, in so many respects, those are serious indications of forward progress against this billion-dollar issue, right? But they are, as robust as they are, they get you to about nothing. They leave 90% of the problem unsolved. Okay, that raises itself really interesting policy questions. And some of them are abstract, some of them aren't abstract. Which is to say, gosh, since we're crafting policy for you and we need your advice on this, if we're spending this amount of money and we're still leaving 90% of the problem, untouched, maybe we should just take what we're spending, stick it in our pocket, and do something else. Right? Plow more regularly. Right? Whatever it is you choose to do. Right? Change the mill rate. Plow more regularly. Whatever it is, there's an opportunity cost consideration. Now we take that same opportunity cost consideration to the affordability issue. You got a $3 billion issue here, and no leverage value. So you're putting $45 million a year into this, which is huge. It's huge. Right? $45 million a year, but that still leaves 82%, right, of the problem unresolved. Okay? Effectively amounting to, your affordability work kind of is a lottery system. Right? It's like who's lucky enough to be on the receiving end of affordability help. Right? That's what your policy is. But that's what everybody's policy is. You're not any worse than, or better or worse than, Omaha or any place else. It's a lottery system. Okay? Now, the bottom left here, it's a $3 billion issue, and there's no leverage. Private sector will not participate in solving that problem. There's nothing for them in that. Okay? Zero. Okay? There's no creative financing. Okay? It's there. Right? So now you got these two dilemmas. What do we do? Right? So we asked the community, right, through some surveys, to rate the relative severity of these two issues. And the community told us, right, that as you go on the left side, right, that the willingness gap, the market gap, right, is a problem, right? On a scale of 0 to 10, it rates a 6. They also related the affordability is a significantly larger issue of greater importance. Okay, so think about that. Okay, that's where the community sits now. Okay, which brings us to changing hats a little bit. Okay, so from agnostic presentation to here's where you are, we think that leaves you with 3 options. Right, stay the course, make minor tweaks to what you're doing, or act differently. Right, and when we look at the pros and cons of each of the 3, right? Staying the course is, none of them are inexpensive. My gosh, none of them are inexpensive. Moving left to right, they get only more expensive, right? But so too do the opportunity costs. And so we would not, if asked, we would not recommend minor tweaks. We would recommend stay where you are, right? Your market is in many respects a Goldilocks market. It's a market we like very much, right? It's affordable. For most homeowners, there's a return on their investment north of inflation, right? Which wasn't the case when we were here several years ago. But now, looking back over a broader timeline, back to fourth quarter 2014, right? The returns have been good, right? So staying the course, absolutely. There's much to recommend it. Okay. The con, there's probably other cons. It leaves a lot on the table, okay? To Councilman Gatto's point, if you stay the course, right, you might not get to all the places you want to get to, right? So and that trade-off, this for that is constant. The far right is to do something very, very different, right? Very, and we would recommend either 1 or 3 as your option. When looking at this, what we think is if you were to act differently, acting differently really means asking, my gosh, over the next 20 or 30 years, how would we think about those 45,000 homes? Where they are, what size lots they're on, how do those blocks work? How would we think about, public interventions? What would the mechanisms look like if we wanted to do that? How do we begin to think about that? And especially given the creative innovative and highly successful planning and implementation work on your TIF side, on the nodes and corridors, how to marry that to what Plan DSM tells you, right? So I think if you were to, you can confidently stay the course, and that is a good housing policy. But it will leave untouched, largely untouched, this 45,000 challenge structures, okay, market challenging structures. You could alternatively really decide to make that a priority and then ask the question, okay, what would that mean? What would that look like? What would that cost? How would we do it? What would the opportunity cost? How would we pay for it? And things like that. So I think that's where we are. Our ambition is to get you something that actually looks not too drafty, looks like somebody who knows what they're doing wrote something on or about Valentine's Day, in writing, a document that's good, that shakes hands with your zoning code, shakes hands with your comprehensive plan, shakes hands with all of the other plans, your transportation plan, your CIP. You know, it's something that can help you guide decision making as members of council. I can take questions, or I can we can whatever works for you all.
I'll open it up. Does anyone have questions? Well, you can start now. It's we can go each one and go back
Can
around.
you go back to screen?
Do what?
It's
Go
our
back to screen and where the 45,000 units are. No, in between
Back.
there.
Further back?
No, the second to last.
where
This
it
guy?
says
Next month.
where
Sorry.
it has
There
three.
you go.
Yeah. Okay.
So when you say prioritizing 45,000 existing older and small units, do you mean taking single-family units and making them duplex? You mean adding on to them, or what are one or two strategies for those? Because the more investment we do, the less affordable they become, because they're going to have to drive higher rents, higher price.
You have what is called a Hobson's choice.
Yeah.
That's what you've got. You have a Hobson's choice. And so now you're going to have to figure out your way to cope with that conundrum, right? So if you want to wrap your arms around this challenge, right? Now the question is, how much foot do you put on the gas? How much foot is on the brake or the clutch? You know, you've got a car on a hill, right? How do we hold it steady when the brake doesn't work, right? And so it's really titrating that effort. In practice, it could take a number of forms. You could expect that rehabilitating a sizable number of those, right, and holding a sizable number of those affordable, right, is a way to navigate the Hobson's choice. You can, but not all of them. You could expect to rehab another chunk of them, but to a much higher standard, right? That would also allow you to, I think, find a little bit of balance, right? But that probably alone won't do it, because at the end of the day, when we've taken a parcelized view of where the structures are, the block configurations, parcel shapes, footprint of houses, square footage, FAR, we started to look at this. Some number of them, right? Actually, it probably makes better sense to acquire, scrape, and redevelop, right? And so only in a few cases, Councilman, would I say take the existing structure and add to it so it's 2 units. I'd actually, on a case-by-case basis, imagine I want the structure, I acquire the structure, I take the structure down, I take the structure down next to it, I marry the 2 lots, add 2 homes, I'm going to infill with 6, infilling with the 6 where there were 2, right? Now I've got 6 new instead of 2 old, and of the 6 new, maybe 5 of the 6 are market rate, or 4 of the 6 are market rate, so now I have a mix. That would be an off-the-cuff way to think. But now you have to scale that, because what won't work, what absolutely you do not want to do is say, well, that sounds kind of, interesting and cool and fun, right? Well, it's interesting and cool and fun when you're not talking scale. Scale That's a whole other issue, right? So take 45,000 divided by 20 years, right? And now you've got to really begin thinking about how that works. And the way that spins out is, you're doing, several hundred, you're building a very large system, and trying to think through how much is home ownership, how much is rental, right? Position to respond to what segment of the market, right? All the while, never letting your eyes off the real prize, which is I have to exist. I have to have a general fund, or I don't exist.
So I'm curious about the way this choice has kind of been laid out for us.
Yep, this one,
Well,
or we can go back one. Sure.
I think it's the bigger choice, all the way to the beginning. So this idea that new construction is a small piece of this, and we shouldn't think about new construction at all.
Didn't say that. I said that don't be overly seduced by the confection of new construction, such that you forget the 45,000 that are right in front of you. That's what I said.
Okay, but the focus of the housing strategy is not on the new construction.
It can be. It's whatever you tell us to make it be.
Right, but that's not how the decision's being set up for us right? I mean, there's not hey, you've got a lot of surface lots, underutilized lots.
You do, right.
Downtown Des Moines. You could have a vision, instead of having 15,000 people living in downtown Des Moines, you could have 30 or 45,000 people living in downtown Des Moines, and that's the best way to capture those 100,000 plus households. And in the meantime, you'll also build some
Great point.
affordability with that.
We-
I mean,
It's a both and, right? So I would agree that it's absolutely a both and. And when we did look at, we did a land use analysis. Your acreage is astonishingly sufficient to infill at very high numbers, right? Even at moderate density, you can capture a lot. There's no question, and that's a great vehicle for competing with the suburbs and those higher income markets. Absolutely, it's a both and.
right. I guess it didn't, in the presentation, it doesn't feel like a both and. The focus is on the existing housing stock, not on any pieces of the new construction. And some of this, the two kind of go hand in hand.
For sure.
You create dense corridors that attract the vibrancy, because density is important to pieces of that.
Agreed.
That's part of what motivates people to invest in neighborhoods as well.
Agreed.
You might start in a multifamily building on a corridor, and your next step is going to be to go into a single family home, and you might be more willing to invest in that single family home.
100% agreed.
So why was the decision made to focus on the existing housing and not think about it? I mean, this is called a housing strategy.
Right.
And right now the focus is entirely on the existing homes and existing buildings, and it doesn't seem like there's any sort of new component.
Well, on this slide, which I did cover, on the right side here, it's addressing the nodes and corridors with new development in a mixed income manner. So this very much is a both and, right? What I did was emphasize the existing 45, because the existing 45 aren't going to get better on their own. And as they don't get better on their own, that's 45,000 structures that are going to cost more than they're going to overall over the life cycle over the next 2 decades. They're going to cost the city more than they're going to provide in tax base, right? Which leaves you fiscally challenged. And if you look at here, you would have to triple your production, right, to actually make that meaningful dent, to really get to a meaningful dent in where you want to, where the both and gives you both sides. On the new construction and on the rehab side, now you're actually, in order to cook with gas, you have to have real numbers on the new construction side. This becomes an additional challenge, though. Like all states, you are aging, right? Like almost, and you are aging faster than most states. And you're emptying out of the 99 counties, 93 of those counties are emptying out, right, at an astonishing rate. They're also done emptying out. They don't have anybody else to empty out, okay? Those 93 counties can't keep exporting 25-year-olds to you because they don't exist anymore, right? They're not making them anymore. And your capture area for all the states around you, the story's exactly the same. So state demographer projections, sober demographer projections, right, don't put you at 10, 15, 20, and 25,000, right? They put you on the shorter end of that stick, right? So you definitely want to tap into, right, growth, and you want to tap into growth with new construction, and you want it to be dense, and you want it to be properly located per Plan DSM. But it's expensive, and if you don't also pay attention to the existing challenges you've got, you will have real fiscal challenges down the road. Moreover, rehabbing an existing home, so if you were to rehab a third of those 45,000 and deed restrict them as affordable, your capacity to obtain quality and affordability in the compared to the cost of new construction, right? It's going to cost me $225,000 to put a new unit in place that's affordable. I can rehab an existing unit for a fraction of that and call it affordable. So the new construction works, but to a point. You want it, but you don't want to neglect the upgrading of the existing stocks. Okay. One last point, and Mayor, it's an important piece here. Your existing stocks are clustered. The clustering of those existing stocks is the clustering of struggling households, right? The clustering of your struggling households is not disconnectable from the manner, from the degree to which schools become part of the conversation of marketability of Des Moines. There's no easy way out of this, and there's no cheap way out of this. Which isn't bad news. It's just a problem to solve.
Opportunity.
Mayor, may I make one
Yes.
other comment?
Go right ahead.
Don't be discouraged. Part of the conversation is going to be who performs this work, how do we incentivize the private sector, and when we think about tax abatement and other areas of assistance as we enter into more struggling financial times, that's where the money needs to be, and there is a place for the city government. And I think about consolidating land toward larger developments. Usually, my observation is that has to be done by cities. So that's because developers aren't going to want to be a bank of holding ground until certain things are required. I'm excited about the opportunities. We just need to have an area of focus and nibble at one at a time. I would agree with you that schools play a big part in it. How many people do we know that have gone out to the suburbs because of the school? Proximity and quality of services is also a factor. And I think that's one area where we excel. We have lots of neat neighborhood areas that have services already. And Highland Park is a classic example in how it's exploding, and in part because it has great services already. So it's going to be a matter of prioritization.
Thank you. If anyone else has anything else? If not, thank you,
Thanks,
Charles,
Mayor.
for the presentation. And we look forward to the final recommendations and opportunity to keep moving Des Moines forward. And with that, we will reconvene at, I believe, 4:50 for our regular city council meeting tonight. Thank you.